In the endless ocean of stars, every empire believed it was eternal. The Dralek Dominion, with its fleets of silver warships, ruled half the spiral arm. The Corran warlords, brutal and savage, took pride in chains and blood. The Yrn Confederacy hid behind walls of technology, convinced no other species could ever reach their level of power. For millennia they fought, traded, and expanded, never fearing that anyone could shake their thrones. And somewhere, on a small blue planet circling an unremarkable sun, lived humanity. To the galaxy, Earth was nothing special. Its people were called weak, fragile, and unfit for the harshness of the void. Their lives were short compared to the long centuries of other races. Their technology, though clever, was considered crude. Their bodies were soft, their emotions too strong, their anger too wild. In the councils of the great empires, when humans were mentioned, they were spoken of with mockery. Ah, the little ones, the lords would laugh, fit only for mining, farming, or being servants. The first human colonies beyond Earth's reach did not last long. Pirates raided them. Warlords enslaved them. Whole settlements disappeared overnight, swallowed by cruelty. Those who survived carried their grief like heavy chains. Families torn apart. Children stolen. Friends lost to slavery. Humanity, it seemed, had no place in the galaxy. They were too small, too weak, too alone. But within that despair, something stirred. Humans had always known hardship. Their history was full of wars, struggles, plagues, disasters, and losses. Each time they had risen again. Each time they had found a way to adapt. And though the empires mocked their emotions, those same emotions gave them a strength that could not be measured by ships or weapons. Anger, love, hope, the fire of refusing to bow. In the far corners of the colonies, whispers began to spread. Whispers of resistance, whispers of pilots who refused to run, who struck back even when outnumbered. At first they were only stories, half-truths spoken in broken taverns and dark cellars. A single fighter craft destroying a slaver convoy, a ragtag crew vanishing into asteroid fields and returning with enemy blood on their hulls. Survivors told these stories like prayers, as if speaking them could make them real. For the empires, these were nothing more than sparks in the dark, easy to crush. But they did not understand the human heart. Every spark lit another, every story gave courage, and in time those sparks grew into a flame. Among the stars, humanity began to change. They were no longer just colonists and farmers. They became fighters, pilots, and warriors. They built ships not for trade, but for survival. Small, fast, unpredictable ships, each one piloted by someone with nothing left to lose. These men and women carried their grief into battle, and grief turned to fury. They did not fight for glory. They did not fight for conquest. They fought because they had to. One such pilot was remembered only by the name Vera. She had lost her children to the Corran slavers, her husband to a burning colony. When she took the skies, she fought like a storm, tearing apart ships far larger than her own. Another was Cade, once an engineer, who turned mining vessels into war machines armed with stolen weapons and desperate imagination. There were many like them, nameless or forgotten, each one carrying the weight of their broken world. Together, they were not an army. They were scattered, wounded, and hunted. But they had something no empire could crush: will. And slowly the galaxy began to notice. The Dralek warlords complained of human raiders that slipped through impossible defenses. The Yrn merchants lost fleets to ambushes that should never have worked. Entire slaver convoys vanished into silence, their wrecks later found floating in the void. What had once been called weakness was becoming something far more dangerous. Still, humanity remained underestimated. The empires believed it was only a nuisance, a passing rebellion. But the whispers continued to grow. Colonies told tales of pilots with iron hearts who would rather die than kneel. Children spoke of heroes and patched-up ships who burned brighter than any star. And in the quiet nights of Earth, old veterans looked to the sky and whispered the same vow: "We are not broken. We will not kneel." The galaxy had forgotten humanity, but humanity had not forgotten itself. And soon the stars would remember their name. In the beginning, They were only scattered souls. Survivors of broken colonies, pilots who had lost everything, engineers who could no longer build homes but could still build weapons, farmers who had taken up rifles instead of plows. They had no flag, no council, no leader, but they had one thing in common: the fire of loss. From that fire the aces were born. They were not called aces at first. The galaxy had many names for them: raiders, scavengers, rebels. But when battle reports began to show something different, when fleets too large to fail fell against small human groups, the galaxy whispered a new word: aces. It meant pilots who could not be beaten, fighters who turned impossible odds into victory. The name stuck not because the humans chose it, but because their enemies feared it. Each ace had a story carved into pain. One had seen his entire family burned when a warlord's ships bombed his colony from orbit. He swore never to rest until he had destroyed 10 enemy ships for each family member lost. Another had been a slave for years, working in mines under the lash of alien overseers, until one night she escaped with a stolen vessel. She returned not to hide but to fight, her ship scarred and ugly but her heart unbreakable. They fought not as soldiers trained in academies, but as survivors who had nothing left to lose. This made them dangerous because where empires fought for territory and power, the aces fought for life, for memory, for vengeance. They were ruthless not by choice but because mercy had been shown to them by no one. Every time they launched into the void, they carried with them the ghosts of the fallen. At first their ships were small, patched together crafts stolen from wreckage or bought in secret from black markets. Engines roared with mismatched parts. Weapons were bolted on like afterthoughts and hulls bore scars of past battles. But what they lacked in polish they made up for in creativity. Humans had always been builders, tinkerers, problem solvers. In their hands, even broken machines became deadly. A mining drill could become a weapon. An engine part could become a trap. And when they flew, they did not fly by rules but by instinct, weaving through battles like lightning through storm clouds. The first great strike came in the Corin sector. A convoy of slaver ships filled with thousands of captured humans moved across the stars under the guard of 6 heavy war cruisers. To face such a force with only a handful of fighters was madness. But the aces did not see madness. They saw only their people, chained and suffering. With silent determination they launched their attack. The battle was chaos. Human ships darted between the cruisers, baiting their weapons, luring them into crossfire. One ace sacrificed his craft by ramming into the lead cruiser's engine, tearing the beast in half. Another lured 2 warships into an asteroid field, where their bulk made them easy prey for traps. In the end, the convoy lay in ruins. The aces opened the slaver holds and freed their kin, who wept as they embraced the stars again. For the first time, hope spread like fire through the colonies. From that day, the aces were no longer whispers. They became a symbol. Their victories were not just battles won. They were proof that humanity could fight back. Songs were sung of them in refugee camps. Children played games pretending to be ace pilots, flying imaginary ships through the air. In the hearts of the broken, courage began to grow. But courage came with cost. The aces paid in blood. Every mission risked their lives. Many never returned, their ships lost in the endless dark. The survivors carried the weight of fallen comrades, adding names to long lists etched into the walls of their hidden bases. To outsiders they seemed merciless, cold, even monstrous. But behind their helmets they were simply tired souls who refused to stop fighting. The galaxy began to tremble. Warlords who once mocked humanity now sent fleets to hunt these aces. But the more they hunted, the more the aces adapted. Battles that should have been crushing defeats became brutal ambushes. Time after time, alien commanders watched their ships fall to humans who fought with reckless brilliance. And with every defeat, the legend of the aces grew sharper. Among themselves, the aces did not boast. They did not call themselves heroes. Around the campfires of abandoned stations and in the silence of their battered ships, they spoke of one thing only: never kneeling again. Their strength was not pride but defiance. a refusal to let grief become chains. And so the galaxy, once certain of humanity's weakness, began to see the truth. These were not fragile creatures to be mocked. These were iron-willed survivors forged in fire, ruthless in the void, relentless in the fight. The aces had risen, and with them, humanity's story was only beginning. The galaxy soon learned to fear the silence before a storm, for when the stars grew quiet, and sensors flickered with strange signals, it meant the aces were near. They never came with warning, never announced themselves. They struck like shadows, vanishing into the dark as quickly as they appeared. To the empires, it was not war. It was terror. At first, alien commanders tried to laugh it off. They are only humans, they said. Fragile, emotional, reckless. They will burn themselves out. But the battles proved otherwise. The aces did not fight like any other race. They did not march in rows or follow predictable orders. They fought with instinct, with chaos, with a kind of madness that made no sense until the enemy was already burning. A convoy of the Dralic Dominion once traveled with 20 escort ships, confident in their strength. When the aces came, they did not attack head-on. They planted false signals across the sector, lured the escorts away, then swarmed the unguarded carriers with brutal precision. The Dralic never forgot that day. Their pride shattered, their fleets shaken, they whispered a new truth in their war halls. Beware the humans. They strike without mercy. What frightened the empires most was not just the aces' victories, it was the way they fought. They showed no hesitation, no pause, no fear. When a comrade fell, another would push forward, carrying the fight with doubled fury. When a ship was too damaged to escape, its pilot would ram into the enemy, turning their own death into a weapon. To the aces, survival was not guaranteed, but victory was demanded. Ruthless. That was the word the galaxy chose for them. But for the aces, it was not ruthlessness for its own sake. They did not enjoy cruelty. They did not revel in blood. They were merciless because mercy had been denied to them. Their families had been enslaved. Their homes had been burned. Their children had been stolen. Against such crimes, kindness had no place. They fought with iron wills, their hearts sharpened by grief, their hands steady with rage. And yet, behind their brutal image, they were still human. In the quiet after battles, when the stars glowed with wreckage, they mourned. They whispered the names of the dead. They carried pictures of families inside their cockpits taped to the controls. They laughed bitterly, cried silently, and drank together in the hollow shells of old stations. They were not monsters. They were wounded souls who had learned that the only language the galaxy understood was strength. One story spread across the colonies, told and retold in every corner of human space. A small group of aces had once defended a mining colony against an entire Quran fleet. Outnumbered 20-1, they fought for hours, their ships breaking apart piece by piece. In the end, none of the aces survived, but the Quran fleet was destroyed, their wrecks floating lifeless in orbit. The colony was saved. The people called it the Stand of the 12, and from that day, children lit candles in honor of those nameless pilots. Their sacrifice became a symbol. Better to die free than to live in chains. As their legend grew, so did their reach. Alien traders whispered of human ambushes and forgotten trade routes. Slavers spoke of raiding parties vanishing without a trace. Entire sectors became haunted by the fear of human fighters. Even the largest warlords began to change their paths, avoiding human territories they once claimed as theirs. The galaxy had underestimated humanity, and now it was paying the price. The aces had turned their pain into fire, and that fire was spreading. Their tactics were studied but never understood. Their courage was mocked but never broken. Their name became a curse among enemies and a prayer among the enslaved. Still, victory never came without cost. The aces lost brothers and sisters in every battle. Their ranks grew thinner, their scars deeper. But with every loss, their resolve only hardened. When one ace fell, another rose to take their place, carrying the memory of the fallen into the next fight. It was as if the very spirit of humanity refused to die. passing from pilot to pilot, stronger with every soul claimed by the void. And so the galaxy trembled. Empires that once seemed unshakable began to bend. Warlords who once laughed now hid behind thicker walls. The aces had become more than fighters. They had become symbols of a truth the galaxy could no longer deny. Humanity was not weak. Humanity was not fragile. Humanity was iron, wrapped in flesh, driven by fire. In the end, the galaxy called them ruthless, but humanity called them necessary. And above the wreckage of fallen empires, their ships carved trails of light through the stars, each streak a reminder the forgotten race had returned, and they would never bow again. At first, the empires treated the aces as nothing more than a nuisance. The Dralic Dominion sent fleets of hundreds, believing sheer numbers would crush the humans. The Quran warlords laughed, calling the aces desperate vermin. The Yearn Confederacy analyzed human tactics with cold logic, certain they could predict their every move. For a short while, the galaxy believed the storm would pass. But the storm did not pass. It grew. The first cracks appeared in the Dominion. Their convoys, once untouchable, began to vanish. Trade routes grew empty, as if the very stars had swallowed their ships. Colonies that once paid tribute to the Dominion rose in rebellion, encouraged by whispers of human victories. At first, the Dominion crushed these uprisings. But each time the aces arrived, not as an army but as lightning strikes. One day here, another day there. They cut supply lines, destroyed garrisons, and disappeared before reinforcements could respond. The great Dominion machine began to grind slower, its power weakened by 1,000 small wounds. The Quran warlords fared no better. Brutal and arrogant, they sent wave after wave of raiders into human sectors, determined to burn every settlement to ash. But the aces were waiting. In asteroid belts and nebula clouds and shattered moons, the humans laid traps. The warlords' massive fleets became their own prison, lured into narrow passes where speed and agility favored the smaller human ships. Time and time again, the Quran lost ships by the dozens while the humans vanished into the dark. The warlords, once feared across the stars, began to whisper curses in their war halls. The more they attacked, the more their fleets bled. The Iron Confederacy tried to respond with science. They built new weapons, new shields, new algorithms to track the unpredictable human style. But the humans were not machines. They fought with instinct, with chaos, with imagination. Every time the Yearn adapted, the aces changed again, breaking patterns, rewriting the rules of battle. The Confederacy's pride began to falter. Their leaders had always believed intelligence was supreme, yet they could not outthink human desperation. Soon, the galaxy began to notice something strange. It was not only human colonies that resisted now. Other enslaved races, small broken people who had endured centuries of cruelty, looked to the humans and saw hope. They saw a species once mocked and beaten rise to strike down their masters. And slowly courage spread. Rebels lit fires in the shadows. Slaves began to whisper the name of the aces like a prayer. The empires could not understand it. To them, strength was measured in fleets and armies. But humans measured strength in will. A single ace could inspire thousands. A single battle could ignite revolutions. For every human victory, the galaxy itself seemed to tilt. The cost, however, was heavy. The aces lost comrades in every fight. Ships returned scarred, pilots returned broken, and some never returned at all. They carved the names of the fallen onto steel plates, bolted to the walls of their hidden bases. Those walls grew heavy with names, heavier with each passing year. But instead of crushing them, it gave them purpose. The dead were not forgotten. They were fuel for the fire. Every time an ace launched into battle, they carried hundreds of voices with them, voices that whispered, "Never kneel. Never break." The empires grew desperate. They united fleets that had once fought each other, hoping together they could drown the human rebellion. 1,000 ships gathered to strike at a single colony believed to house the aces. When they arrived, the colony was empty. Instead, they found themselves surrounded by hidden mines, disrupted by electronic warfare, cut apart by a fleet half their size. In one night, the Great Alliance fleet was reduced to wreckage, drifting lifeless through the void. The survivors fled, shaken, their arrogance shattered. That night became legend. The galaxy called it the breaking of giants. To humanity, it was proof that no empire, no matter how mighty, was untouchable. From that point onward, the galaxy was no longer laughing. The halls of the Dominion echoed with silence. The warlords argued and fought among themselves, their unity shattered. The Confederacy hid deeper behind their walls, but even there, fear gnawed at their leaders. The balance of power, which had stood for centuries, was crumbling, and at the heart of it all were the humans. The forgotten race. The ones no one had feared. Their aces flew through the void like spirits of vengeance, relentless and unyielding. They were not just defending their kind now. They were changing the galaxy itself. Empires that had once seemed eternal were beginning to shake, and the galaxy finally understood a truth it had ignored for too long. Humans did not need to be the strongest, or the smartest, or the most advanced. They only needed the will to fight, and that will was stronger than any throne. The storm was no longer coming. The storm was here. Victory has a price. The galaxy saw the victories of the aces, but it never saw the graves left behind. For every fleet destroyed, an ace was lost. For every colony saved, a pilot did not return. Humanity's rise was written not only in fire and triumph, but also in blood and sorrow. The aces were feared across the stars, but within their hidden bases, they were not warriors. They were broken men and women carrying unbearable weight. Their ships came back with hulls torn apart, engines barely holding, and cockpits smeared with blood. Some pilots limped back with burns on their skin, others with shattered bones, others with eyes that no longer carried light, and too often, some ships never returned at all, vanishing into the endless dark. The survivors never forgot. Each time they landed, they would gather in silence, looking at the empty spaces where friends should have been. On the walls of their stations, they carved names. The lists grew longer each month. A child could walk through those halls and read thousands of names, each one a story, each one a life given so that humanity might rise. And yet, there was no end. For every battle won, another waited. The empires struck harder, and the aces struck back harder still. It became a cycle of pain. Pilots who had once laughed, once sung songs around makeshift fires, grew quiet. Their smiles faded, their voices rough with exhaustion. Sleep became rare, haunted by dreams of burning colonies and screams of the lost. Still, they did not stop, because they could not. Each ace carried memories too heavy to lay down. They remembered families taken by slavers, friends executed by warlords, children starving on abandoned colonies. Those memories became fuel. To stop fighting would be to betray the dead. To surrender would mean their sacrifices were for nothing. And so, even as their bodies grew weaker, their will only grew stronger. Among them, stories of sacrifice spread like sacred tales. One pilot, known only as Darren, once faced a fleet alone when his squadron was destroyed. His ship was breaking apart, his weapons almost gone, but he refused to flee. Instead, he rammed his craft into the enemy's flagship reactor. The explosion tore the ship in half, and with it the enemy fleet collapsed in confusion. His comrades later whispered that his last words, broadcast before impact, were, "Tell my daughter, we are free." Another story was of Elira, an engineer turned pilot. Her vessel was crippled in the middle of a battle, unable to escape. Instead of ejecting, she overcharged her reactor, luring 3 enemy cruisers toward her. She sang an old Earth song into the comms before detonating, destroying the cruisers with her. The colonies remembered her as the Star Singer, and mothers told her story to children as a lesson in courage. These sacrifices became the heart of the aces. Every time one of them fell, the survivors carried their memory like a shield. They painted symbols on their ships, names, pictures, words, so the fallen would fly with them still. Some ships bore dozens of marks, a record of how many comrades had been lost. To outsiders, the aces looked ruthless, but to those within, they were a family bound by grief. The galaxy began to see it too. Reports spoke not only of victories but of the terrible cost humans were willing to pay. Alien commanders shook their heads, unable to understand. Why fight when the cost is so high? They asked. But the humans knew the answer. Because the cost of kneeling was higher. Still, the weight pressed on them. Some aces broke under the strain. Pilots disappeared into the void, never answering hails, their ships found drifting lifeless days later. Others turned cold, speaking little, their humanity buried beneath scars. The leaders of the aces tried to comfort them, but they were wounded themselves. Every soul lost was another crack in their armor, and yet even in their darkest hours there was light. In the colonies they saved, children ran free, no longer chained, families reunited, hugging with tears streaming down their faces. Old men and women lit candles for the aces, whispering blessings into the stars. These moments reminded the pilots why they fought. They were not just fighting for vengeance. They were fighting so that one day their children would never need to pick up weapons again. That dream, fragile and distant, was the only thing that kept them alive. The dream that someday the walls of names would stop growing, that someday the dead would finally rest, that someday no human would ever kneel to a warlord again. And so, battered but unbroken, the aces carried on. Their bodies weakened, their ships scarred, their hearts heavy, but their wills unshaken. For in their iron wills lay the very soul of humanity. The empires began to realize a terrible truth. No matter how many humans they killed, no matter how many battles they won, they could not break them, because the aces had already accepted death. And when death no longer frightens a people, there is nothing left in the galaxy that can stop them. The empires had always believed they were eternal. Their fleets filled the skies of countless worlds, their banners draped across entire star systems, and their armies crushed rebellion wherever it rose. For centuries they had no equal, but the aces had changed everything. By now their strikes had become legend. A fleet would vanish overnight, a fortress reduced to rubble, a warlord slain in his own throne room. No one ever saw them coming, and no one could stop them once they arrived. Fear spread faster than light. Entire garrisons surrendered at the mere rumor of aces nearby. The Corran warlords were the first to break. Their kind had ruled with brutality for ages, enslaving weaker races and burning entire planets to prove their dominance. But arrogance turned to dread when the aces arrived at their stronghold world. Not with fleets, not with armies, just a few dozen ships cutting through the sky like blades of fire. The warlords mustered thousands to meet them, laughing at the thought of humans daring to strike their heart. The laughter ended quickly. The battle lasted only hours, but to the Corran it felt like a lifetime. Their war engines, colossal dreadnoughts that had terrorized the galaxy, burned one by one. The aces fought like ghosts, slipping between giants, striking where shields were weakest, vanishing into smoke. At the end, the great warlord Karthos, once feared for conquering entire sectors, stood surrounded by his own burning fleet. His warriors fled, his power shattered, and when the aces' leader walked into his hall, Karthos fell to his knees. Not because of pity or diplomacy, but because he understood the truth. No empire could stand against will that refused to break. Word of his surrender spread like wildfire. Other warlords, once proud and cruel, bent the knee as well. Some out of fear, others because they saw in humans something they could never match. For the first time in living memory, the Corran halls were silent. The sound of chains being broken replaced the sound of slaves being whipped. The aces left as quickly as they came, but their mark remained. The warlords who had once enslaved others now swore loyalty, if only to survive. The Dralek Dominion followed soon after. Their empire had already been bleeding from countless strikes, their fleets worn thin. When their High Regent ordered one last stand, their people did not rally. They deserted. Colonies rose in rebellion, inspired by the humans. The Regent's final fleet crumbled in a single night, and when the smoke cleared, the Dominion's banners were ash. The Yearn Confederacy resisted the longest. Cold and calculating, they refused to bow. But even they could not fight forever. Their people, once loyal, began to question. They saw the humans not as savages, but as proof that empires could fall. The Confederacy's leaders debated endlessly, but in the end their logic betrayed them. They calculated survival, and survival meant surrender. By then the galaxy had changed. The balance of power that had lasted for centuries collapsed in a single generation. Warlords who once claimed entire constellations now begged for peace. Empires that had enslaved millions now struggled to hold a single system. And all because of a people the galaxy had mocked as weak, primitive, and unworthy. When the Aces returned to their hidden base, scarred and weary, they carried no crowns, no treasures, no thrones. They did not fight for empire or glory. They fought for survival, for freedom, for the right of their species to rise without chains. And because of that, the galaxy itself bent. The warlords had knelt. But it was not the Aces who ruled. It was the idea behind them, the unbreakable will of humanity that now echoed through every corner of the stars. The stars were quieter now. Where once the galaxy trembled under the weight of empires, there was silence, broken only by whispers of change. The Aces had done what no one believed possible. They had struck down giants. Warlords had bent their knees. Rulers had surrendered. And the great banners of oppression lay scattered like ash across forgotten battlefields. But the true victory was not in ruins or crowns. It was in the hearts that now beat with hope. The freed colonies were the first to rise. On worlds once enslaved, children stepped outside without chains on their wrists. Farmers planted seeds without fear of soldiers burning their fields. Songs returned to marketplaces where silence had once reigned. Across countless systems, people looked to the stars and spoke the same word with trembling lips: humanity. At first, the word was said with awe. To many, humans had been nothing but prey, weak, fragile creatures bound to a forgotten homeworld. Yet now they were the spark that had set fire to empires. Their name carried weight, not because of conquest, but because of endurance. Humanity had shown the galaxy that will was stronger than fleets, that courage was sharper than any blade. The Aces did not parade their victories. They returned to their hidden stations weary and scarred. Their halls were still lined with names of the fallen, and their hearts carried wounds deeper than any scar could show. But they understood something no empire ever had. They did not need thrones to rule. Their legacy was not empire but freedom. There were meetings, of course. Leaders of newly freed worlds begged for guidance, for protection, for a voice to unite them. The Aces listened but did not claim power. Instead, they spoke of unity. They urged the colonies and shattered peoples to build something new, not under the shadow of humans but beside them. Humanity had lit the torch, but the galaxy itself had to carry it forward. For many, that was the most shocking thing of all. The warlords had expected the humans to seize control, to crown themselves as new rulers. Instead, they walked away from power. That act alone broke the last chains of fear. If humans had fought only for themselves, they would have been no different from the empires. But they had fought for all, and yet not all wounds healed quickly. The galaxy was still fractured. Shadows remained. Remnants of empires gathered in hidden corners plotting revenge. The scars of slavery and war would take generations to fade. But even in that darkness, a light remained. A single truth echoed through every system. If the humans could rise, so could anyone. Among the Aces, there were no grand celebrations. They honored their dead, repaired their ships, and prepared for whatever would come next. But one evening, under the wide stretch of stars, they stood together in silence. Veterans leaned on each other. Young pilots gazed at the horizon, and in that moment they allowed themselves something rare: peace. For the first time, they felt it was no longer only about survival. It was about a future, not just for Earth, but for the entire galaxy. A future where children would grow up without chains, where songs would fill the air, where no tyrant's banner would smother the skies. The ruthless, iron-willed Aces had struck, and empires had crumbled. The warlords had fallen to their knees, and from that fire something greater was born. Humanity's dawn had arrived, not as conquerors, but as a reminder to the stars that freedom was worth any cost. And as the stars burned quietly above, the galaxy whispered the truth that would never be forgotten. Humans fight. Humans endure. Humans rise.